Now for our next function, the hyperbola. Now this is the function where you have either your first and your third, or your second and your fourth quadrant. Okay, so this is the one that splits in two, or it is symmetrical. Okay, now for this one we have y equals a divided by x minus p plus q. Now what can we tell from this formula? If a is bigger than 0, which means a is positive, we have in our first and our third quadrant. If a is smaller than 0, which means it's negative, we have our function in our second and fourth quadrants. Now here comes the bit tricky part, and I need you to stay with me for it. So P is the vertical asymptote, meaning the up and down. Like this is my vertical asymptote. You'll see my color codes are a bit different, and I'll explain it in a second. So P is my vertical asymptote. Okay, vertical, straight up. Q is my horizontal asymptote, meaning if I look over the horizon. Okay, so this one. So again, P, my vertical asymptote, like I said, x equals P. So if they ask you, what is my equation for my vertical asymptote, you're going to say x is equal to P. So whatever P is, you're going to equal it to it. Q is my horizontal asymptote. Y equals Q. Okay, so whatever Q is equal to, you're going to equal that to Y, and that is your equation. Now we did a few of these, but remember it. P is my vertical asymptote and Q is my horizontal asymptote. Now the tricky part comes in, and that's why I color coded it that way. Although P is my vertical asymptote, like the one that goes here, it shifts my graph from left to right. Okay, so it can either go left or it can go right. Now remember, the asymptote is the line it cannot touch ever. So if I move this line left, that means my whole graph must move left, which means it is a horizontal shift, left and right. Or if I move my vertical asymptote right, the whole graph shifts left and right, and that makes it a horizontal shift. Okay, now for Q. Okay, with Q, we're going to have is my horizontal asymptote. Okay, which means if I move it up or down, so if I move this asymptote one up, my whole graph is going to make a vertical shift up. Or if I have it one down, this whole graph is going to make a vertical shift down. So remember, P is my vertical asymptote moving left, right. Q is my horizontal asymptote moving this whole thing either up or down. Okay. Yes, this is a bit confusing, but bear with me. We are going to do some example questions when I talk to you guys again. Now the next important thing about this is my axis of symmetry and my point of intersection. Now the hyperbola has two axes of symmetry. So let's say this is my y-axis and this is my x-axis. We're always going to have, like the parabola, we talked about the axis of symmetry. If I fold it in half, it would be symmetrical. So now again we have that, but this time this graph can fold twice, meaning if I fold the graph along this line, this piece would fit perfectly on that piece, and this piece would fit perfectly on that piece. But also, if I fold it along this line, this half of the graph would fit perfectly on that half of the graph, and therefore the hyperbola has two axes of symmetry. So the first equation is y equals x minus p plus q, and the other axis of symmetry is just completely the opposite of it, which is negative x plus plus p plus q. As you can see, this one has a positive gradient, which means this one is positive gradient. The other one has a negative gradient. which means it's in the opposite direction. Okay, so these two lines stay exactly the same. No matter if your A is bigger than 0 or your A is smaller than 0. These two positions does not change at all. Okay, the only thing that's going to change is where it cuts the graph. Because if my A is bigger than 0, if it's positive, it will cut my graph in the first and in the third quadrants. Okay, and if my A is smaller, which means it's negative, it'll cut my graph in the second and fourth quadrant. Now, how do I know where it cuts? Okay, there's two ways. One, you can work it out. Okay, you can equal the equation to each other. So you can equal this equation to my hyperbola equation, and you should get to those 2 points. Okay, other than that, you memorize the coordinates. Saying if A is bigger than 0, and please make notes of this. I will put this notes on Google Classroom after I saw that you guys made your own notes. Okay, so if A is bigger than 0, we're going to have it cut in our first place where positive the root of A plus P would be our first x coordinate. Okay, and now I can see this coordinate should be positive, which means it would be our top one. Okay, then our y coordinate would be positive root of A plus Q. Again, this coordinate positive, making it that one. Then the second coordinate, so now we have this one, it means the next one must be this one, okay, because it's symmetrical. But as you can see, it would be negative. So negative the root A plus Q, okay, like a negative times a positive would make it a negative. Means we have a negative coordinate as our first x coordinate. Then for our y coordinate, negative the root A plus Q, which also makes it a negative, which fits perfectly in with what we want to do. Okay, now if A is smaller than 0, for our first coordinate, we have negative the root A plus P. So negative times a positive would give me a negative x value, which makes it this one. Then we have positive root of A plus Q. This gives me a positive coordinate for y, which tracks with what we want to see. So here we would have a negative x and a positive y. We have a negative x and a positive y. Then we have positive root A plus P for our first x value, which makes it positive, and that's what we want. We want a positive x value. But already we can see, because it's in our fourth quadrant, we want a negative y value. So negative the root A plus Q would give me a negative value for here. So as you can see, each time it is the root A plus P, or the root A plus P for x as well, and Q is always root A plus Q. The only thing that differs the whole time is whether there's positive or negative in front of the root A. Okay. So you can go and memorize it. I made a little cheat note here on the side saying that for my first value, if A is bigger than 0, I have positive, positive, and for my y, positive, positive. For my second one, I have negative, positive, negative, positive. Then if A is smaller than 0, I have a negative, positive, 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 and a positive, positive, negative, positive. If you want to remember it that way, because I know each time I start with root A and P, and I start with root A and Q. Okay, so that is a little way you can remember it, or again, like I said, you can go and work it out. So that is my hyperbola in a nutshell.